Good evening. I've recently been given two pieces of equipment to go through and delete data off of and return to factory status. And while doing that, it reminded me of two different things that I think are important. Number one, always make sure your data is removed off of things before it's gotten rid of, donated, and sold. And number two, it's important to pay attention to how old your equipment is, when it's actually been given up on by the manufacturer, what's called end of life or end of service, when it's time to replace it and move on, or when it needs updates and when it needs firmware to be taken care of. I'm going to split this into two different videos. The second video, we're going to cover how I handle incoming hardware, from keeping that original copy of the backup, and then going in and let it run its course, and when it's time for it to exit, how to handle getting that stuff removed, the original firmware putting on there, and then donation, whatever. And then we're going to have it in the second video. This video, I'm going to concentrate more on making sure your equipment's A, still viable, not given up by the manufacturer. B, is your equipment up to date? And C, how to check on that stuff. Basically, you should have a method or some type of company checking on your products are current and have the most up-to-date software, which is called firmware, on them. And if they have expired one way or the other, be actively researching your next path, know the risk, or already be in transition to your next product. And this is important because if you've got that router that's been sitting over there and installed for 4 or 5 years, 3-4 years, I mean that's on the high end, hopefully, and it just every once in a while needs a little bump because it needs to be restarted, then chances are the firmware has never been re-updated on it. So you leave yourself open to hackers, you leave yourself open for someone to waltz right in and take your data, things of that nature. So it's important to check that the firmware is up to date on those things. If it's not, then now's the time. It's getting on about March, Christmas season's winding down. It's time to think about those things and get that in gear, get that firmware updated, and let's look and see if those models are last year's models and time to move on. The two products that I have here are from a hemp farm. The first product that I have is part of a larger router. It's actually a Cisco 1841 router, still with the rack gears on it. It's been cleaned up, and it's at the end of its life. And it was announced that it would be at the end of its life in November of 2010, and the last day of its support was in October of 2016, meaning that it was just taken out of service here in this past December. It should not have been used. Now, there's nothing physically wrong with this unit. However, it's got about 5 years of updates and firmware that should be applied to it that's just not there. Now, the good thing about this is it wasn't doing anything really important except for interfacing a small security system from one barn, and also interfacing with like a little control system that had like some little small controls or something. I'm not, don't shoot the messenger. I'm not fully understanding of what it was controlling on that end, but from my understanding, when I asked about it, I was told that it would be nothing that they could have hacked into, that it was also behind something else, so it would have had to go on through that as well. So no harm or foul there, Don. But however, we're looking at a piece of equipment that's over 5 years out. But if it was on the outside of that, had it been hacked or anything, that would have been a prime example of something would be left out that people would know there's vulnerabilities to and could have waltzed right in and gotten the stuff done. Item 2 is a Cisco security appliance ASA 5505. Now, this was announced that it was going to be discontinued in February of 2017, and it's good up until August of this year, August of 2022. And I want to make note that I know a lot of people in this area and a lot of businesses use this unit, the 5505. So if you still got these 5505s, the 55, I think 15 is included in that, and the 5510 as well. Don't quote me on that, but I know the 5505 for a definite. Its last day of support is August 2022. It means they're not giving out any more firmware updates, no more support, no more nothing happens on this unit. It's dead in the water. You use this, it's up to you. It's all on you. The update path from the 5505 is the 5506, which is good until August of 2026. However, I still suggest you upgrade from that unit as well, because I do know some issues of the 5506 that tend to have it lock up and you have to restart it every once in a while. There is a firmware update that solves that problem, but being that it's getting older now, I think it's time to move on from that as well. I highly suggest seeking a different model, maybe a different brand to cover your needs. So how can you check this stuff? Well, the easiest way is go through Google searches. Put in your model, Cisco 5505, end of life, end of service, or go on your manufacturer's websites. Call up the manufacturer. Be warned though, if you call the manufacturer, be ready for a sales pitch, because if your item is definitely out of service, out of time, they're definitely going to try to sell you on this year's model. By looking through the end of life data, you can find out actual dates and researching correct paths for your equipment and know where to follow. There's usually two types of dates. The first is your end of life date, and that's usually when the manufacturer is notifying you of when they're going to start the process, when they're going to stop selling, and when they're going to stop shipping that product. That's your end of life date. The second date from that is going to be your end of support date. Now, this doesn't mean you're not going to find them for sale on eBay. You're not going to be able to pick them up on Craigslist. Your buddy next door is not going to be able to sell them to you, this, that, and the other. What it means is through the manufacturer's channels, they're not going to sell them. They're not going to support them after that date. When you get to the end of support date, which is usually sometimes between 1 to 5 years after the end of life date, that means that's it. Cut off. Very rare circumstances do they issue any some kind of patches, any firmware updates. I've only seen very rare occasions where a virus or malware has hit and they recognize that there's a large amount of people still using them, that they have issued patches and things like that. So don't get caught by using old equipment. There's no reason for that to find that. Firmware, you can find updates and how to update firmware on the manufacturer's websites as well. I suggest you search out them, figure out how to update that firmware, how to download it, and how to apply it. Most routers in the setup now, most modern routers, will not force you to actually download the firmware separately. They actually have a button that will allow it to check and reboot. And some of them even have an automatically update firmware that will automatically keep it up to date. That's your best option for the home user. Allow it to keep it automatically up to date. Allow it to keep on rolling where you don't have to worry about it out of sight. But do still keep checking that into service and the life date. Keep your firmware up to date. Check your into service. Check your into life. Don't get caught without stuff on it. Don't let the hackers in, and don't get messed up. Talk at you later. Hope this keeps you safe.